Brilliant. Are we live?
Yes, we are.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you everyone for coming to Freedom is Indivisible. We will be hearing from Annalise Cisse and Molly Lipson before having some conversation about the topic of freedom and social movement and how we embody these things in our everyday lives and our practices, and also in bringing different movements together and the indivisibility of different social movements. So thank you for being here. And I'm just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping at the top. So we are live now for everyone on Zoom. We are live on YouTube. We will be taking questions, and if you can just post your questions into the chat if you're on YouTube or if you're on Zoom. There should be a little bit of information about how to ask a question that's just gone into the chats as well. So if you could just follow those guidelines. We will be taking the questions at around about 7, sort of 7:10. So if you could aim to have your questions in the chats by 7, so that we can then go through them and pick a couple. That'd be great. Daniela, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, well, hi everyone. I will be hosting today's event on Zoom. So if you have any question about today's event, about the format, if you have any technical issues, you can get in touch with us privately on the Zoom chat. And I will be posting some documents and link on that Zoom chat, so keep an eye. And just want to say that by participating to this conversation, you agree to a Safer Spaces agreement. It has been already shared by email, but I'm going to be posting it once more here. And this is in order to keep it as this event a safe space for everyone. And so, yeah, if you didn't have a chance to have a look, just read it through now. And yeah, one more document that is quite important and I will be sharing now is a resource document. This also can be found on our website under the July's meetup page. And here you can find info, links and resources from our guest speakers of today. And it is an open document. So in general, we would like to encourage you to add your details, links to your practice, or really any relevant material that you would like to share with us today. And yeah, so keep an eye on the Zoom chat, and yeah, if you have any questions, just pop it through that.
Thank you, Daniela. And John, did you have anything else to add to that people need to know?
No, just if anyone does have any problems technically that they do need help with, just send me a message in chat and I'll help as quickly as I can.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. So just before we get going, I'm going to take us through a short grounding exercise just to bring everyone into the room. So you can participate with this in whatever way is comfortable to you, but it's just really good sometimes to help set the space to kind of start with something like this. So it's up to you if you close your eyes or leave your eyes open. It might be best to close your eyes if you're happy to do that. And just bring your attention to your breath. And as you do so, just give a little bit of space to acknowledge what you're feeling at the moment. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Have you been uplifted by anything today? Has there been anything that's been weighing on your mind that feels like weight? Just give a little bit of space to acknowledging those different feelings. And then broaden that to thinking or asking yourself what those feelings are coming from. Is it from something you've seen, something that's happened recently? You're feeling frustrated because you dropped something earlier. Does it feel like something is occupying up quite a lot of space in your mind at the moment? Just give that some space for a second. And as we move into this event, where there are a number of us that have come together to share and to share this space together, just expand that one step further to imagining all the different things that everyone else in this room at the moment, in this online room, is thinking about potentially as they think through what they're feeling, what their day has brought them, and what kind of a space they're in. And just keep that in mind as we move through the event, that all of us have all of these different things going on, and right now is a difficult time in so many different ways. So it's good for us to just ground ourselves in understanding that everyone's going through something right now. So if we can hold space for each other in that way. Great, and as soon as you're ready, come back into the room. And thank you again, everyone, for being here. It's a real pleasure to be able to hold this space and to be a part of the Social Art Network and part of the team bringing this event together. And huge thanks to the rest of the team, to Marcelo and John and Claire and Daniela, and all of the other Social Art Network hosts. I'm gonna read a short poem that's one of my own, and I will say a couple of words about what it's about afterwards, I think. But the poem is called Words and Walls. Wasn't Colnbrook the setting of one of the Brontes novels? Somewhere in the Cotswolds? The Chilterns? I want to know about the history of these houses around me, streets and names, historical and migratory, porous and fluid, permeable and unmoving, structural soup. The moving are not unmoored, the moving's moorings are torn. The moving's moorings are many, constant, reproducing, growing, screaming in invented vacuums, visible but ignored, shrinking, and again, torn and again torn. You, yes, you, tear neural flesh with your blind eyes. You actively kill with your omission. You paint your neighbour invisible. Colnbrook, Brook House, Tinsley's house, Yarl's Wood. If you Google London Heathrow Detention Centre, the first thing that comes up is an ad for immigration lawyers, because only those affected are Googling London Heathrow Detention Centre. Removal Centre, says Revenue and Customs. These walls do not detain, but remove from the here to the brown there, the place called where you came from, and its neighbouring villages, countries. Call to act. All eyes have disappeared, don't call the doctor. Our safety was never here, don't call the police. A lawyer will navigate you through injustice, call to act. That's Words and Walls, and that's a poem that I wrote when I was having a little look into the detention centres that we have in the UK around Gatwick and Heathrow. And it really struck me as telling of how little attention there is paid to those issues. That the first thing that came up was an ad for immigration lawyers, rather than any news articles on those issues or anything like that. So, and in the backdrop of the everything that's happening with Windrush right now, it felt like something, that I kind of wanted to express about. So thank you for giving me a moment to share that with you. And I think we will move on now to our first speaker, a dear friend of mine, Annalise. Annalise is a healing artist, an organizer, an educator, and the co-founder of Common Healing. There is a link to Annalise's website that is on the Social Art Network website, on the event page for this event. So do check out Common Healing and everything that they're doing right now, because there are some really amazing sessions and different resources that you can find there for organising and for healing. So yeah, I will shut up now and let Annalise go ahead.
Thank you, Hannah, for the introduction and for organizing this space. I'm super excited to be here, and for Social Art Network as well. I'm going to start with a quote. The task of the artist is determined always by the status and process and agenda of the community that it already serves. If you're an artist who identifies with, who springs from, who is serviced by, or drafted by a bourgeoisie capitalist class, then that's the kind of writing you do. Then your job is to maintain the status quo, to celebrate exploitation, or to guise it in some lovely romantic way. That's your job. As a cultural worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make revolution irresistible. One of the ways I attempt to do that is by celebrating those victories within the Black community. And I think the mere fact that we're still breathing is a cause for celebration. Also, my job is to critique the reactionary behavior within the community and to keep certain kinds of calls out there. The children, our responsibility of children, our responsibility to maintain some kind of continuity from the past. But I think for any artist, your job is determined by the community you're identifying with. But in this country, the United States, we're not encouraged and equipped at any particular time to view things that way. And so the artwork or the art practice that sells a capitalist ideology is considered art, and anything that deviates from that is considered political propagandist, polemical or didactic, strange, weird, subversive, or ugly. And that is from Toni Cade Bambara in an interview from 1982. I begin with this quote as an invitation to begin this work of radicalizing our practices by understanding fully where you are currently situated, then expanding beyond that and inquiring where you come from. From this place, we can begin to design a vision and chart the next steps. To examine where you are at, to explore where you come from is healing work. The awareness we gain from bearing witness affirms a way of navigation that has an infinitely expanding perspective. Healing is not easy by any means. Healing is real. We heal through the pursuit of truth. In that process, we kick up feelings of shame and guilt, which are difficult to hold. But when we examine these feelings, we can find the pearl that sits inside. We find the way forward. Yes, belief structures will blow up and reality structures will shatter. But the antidote to the evils of patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism is genuine care. We first offer that care to ourselves, and from here we can extend it honestly to others in the form of communal care. So in breaking down the narratives that we default to and live by without question, the frameworks that imprinted onto us from the water we swim in, we can establish new internal frameworks which can manifest in the world. My personal healing practices include transformative energy work, tarot, farming, and a yoga-inspired movement practice. These practices allow me to support my spirit and organize in a way that is completely outside the punitive, hierarchical, and harmful ways our society have been structured. But there's always a need for checking in. I ask the people I work with to hold me accountable, recognizing we all have blind spots. This is one way we can generate collective power. The struggle is never an event. It's a process, a continuous, eternal struggle, Kwame Ture said. You connect with truth, and truth knows no binaries such as good and bad. Truth just is. We have to integrate both the spectrum from dark to light in regards to our positioning in this life and that of our ancestors to create a new world that's honest and authentic. From soil fertilized by truth, roots will grow happily. To avoid diluting the movement, we must understand our individual roles. Every person has their own unique soul contracts, experiences, skills, which culminates in a unique positioning. Capitalism wants us to believe there are a finite set of path options in order to keep us producing, leading us to forget the infinite possibilities available to us as humans. Your power is in your truth and your authentic role. And these roles are dynamic, ever-changing. For me, to be radical is to trade in a commitment to being right for a commitment to a vision. From here, we can hold something as true one day, and the next day we trade that idea for something even more human, without our identities collapsing in the face of being perceived as wrong. If we know our identities to be that within us, which is the most pure, that which is source, that which is earth, we lower the risk of ego flare-ups that block us from progress. So that's just a little something that I wrote inspired by that quote. And I kind of just want to speak a bit more freely about how I came to finding my role specifically. I definitely spent a lot of time kind of trying to fit my work into boxes or fit my interests into boxes. And I was pursuing identity in work as opposed to coming from a place of wholeness and then letting my work flow from that place. So there was a lot of healing that happened over the last several years, and that was held by my community. I couldn't have done it without the love and care from the people around me. And the way I was able to regenerate myself after experiencing like a lot of trauma throughout my life proved to me that that's a microcosm of what can happen in the world. So like if we can practice collective care, and if we can move from a place of care as opposed to a place of punishment, then we can actually heal. And if we're talking prison abolition, because that's something that I'm very present with, is my process of truly becoming an abolitionist, because I noticed that I have my own punitive structures in place. So when we say things, so yesterday, I believe the US had the first lethal injection, the first person killed on death row in I think 17 years. As a prison abolitionist, I am against the death penalty, but this person was a white supremacist who killed a Black family. So like I was confronted with that, and I was like, what does justice look like if I don't want anyone on death row, if I don't want prisons to exist? What does justice look like for Breonna Taylor if I don't want anybody being arrested? And these are not questions that I personally have the answer to, other than joining with our communities and beginning to look at what is long-term rehabilitation. If we have the goal of reintegrating people into society, if we have the goal of ending violence, how do we do that? So again, to be radical for me is just to continue asking questions. I don't think that there's ever going to be a firm answer because this hasn't been done before. So we're experimenting. And even in the case of public accountability. So we're seeing a lot of people right now being held accountable for their actions. There was a really prominent Healing Justice podcast that a white cis woman had founded, who's doing a lot of really important work with the Black and brown queer community activist spaces in this, mostly in the United States. And then people came forward and said, and had experiences working with her that were completely white supremacist and very toxic. So then the New Economy Network called for this woman to step down from a podcast she created, which left it to someone who had been hired as a part-time co-director a month prior. And after sitting with it, that person decided they didn't want to carry it out. That wasn't what they had agreed to. So then we saw the end of this podcast, and having to kind of shift that framework of like the podcast function just changed. So now the purpose is an example of public accountability. And we can even look at it from the perspective too of, we don't constantly need to be producing at this point. We actually need to like scale back production, and we need to be taking things down. So Healing Justice is still, as an entity, teaching us. It's just teaching us through care and public accountability. So kind of back to my point about if we're witnessing and constantly questioning and feeling safe doing that in community, then we can see the world from a more expansive place, and we can take wisdom, we can take insights, we can take knowledge from the dismantling that's happening. We're definitely, as a collective, being called to let go and to surrender in a lot of respects. At the same time, we're being mobilized. And this is what I mean about like, truth is not white or Black or good or bad. Truth is a whole spectrum. And we have to get comfortable navigating that space in between and navigating the unknown so that we can move forward. And the way that I do that is through intensely prioritizing my nervous system. And tarot is another way that I'm able to practice truth being contradictory and complex. So I can put narratives, experiences, ideas, questions onto the different archetypes of these cards. And I use a trauma-informed approach to tarot. But I can witness as opposed to be in the forest and be oscillating between and holding opinions and decisions, because that's exhausting and it's really destabilizing constantly. But if I can just put it in front of me and create space between me and it, then I can work with the different possibilities and create space for the truth to show itself to me. And that can even happen in collective. That can happen in conversations that you're having with your peers. So I think it's really important to be malleable in this time and to see the beauty in that. And to know that we are all impacted by white supremacy and we are conditioned by it. And the way that we move through the world is informed by it. So we have to constantly be checking what we do. And I think the intention, again, needs to be on this vision for the world that we want to live in. The intention can't be to inject ourselves into a movement or to be a part of something. It has to be for a longer vision so that everything that we do is supportive of that vision as opposed to supportive of an ego need right now. So that's kind of all I have for right now, but I'm really excited for questions during that so I can expand upon some of these ideas, because I know like energy work and tarot and some of these other like healing frameworks I use are definitely, maybe not talked about commonly, but I would like to relate it to questions that people have or work that people are doing and speak more specifically about how energy work has helped me heal and is helping me work through my own frameworks and organize in a way that is radical. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annalise. That's kind of like one of the one of the things that has been having me really excited about holding this conversation has been just the multiplicity of different frameworks that we can be using, and I think Molly and Lise, both of you we're all doing the same work. We're using like lots of different frameworks to do that work, and I think it's really beautiful to be able to see how all of these different frameworks come together in kind of creating in finding ways to move through the world as someone who is aligning with movement, with social movement. So thank you, Annalise. And now we will hear from Molly. Molly is an abolition activist and a writer, and another dear friend of mine who I'm really excited to have here. Yeah, Molly and I have been working on a few collaborative projects together. Yeah, I will hand over to you now to carry on with your talk.
Thank you so much, and thanks for this wonderful event. And Annalise, that was super interesting, and I have questions, so I'm excited to hear more about that later. Yeah, I'm going to be talking a bit about how important it is to consider I suppose the word that is used a lot is a sort of intersectionality of issues, but from the perspective of issues that I don't think are always connected in the way that I think they need to be. So this talk is sort of entitled, This is the Crisis. The term climate justice is used to describe how the climate crisis is social, economic, and political rather than just a physical process. Discussions of climate justice are considerably better at addressing racism within a climate context and climate within a racist context than discussions that focus solely on just the physical. When these ideas are adapted by the climate movement here in the global north, the part of the world we have indelicately referred to in the past as developed countries, much of this centres on how the crisis is playing out, particularly on how it disproportionately impacts on poor people of colour, Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ+, disabled people, and those at the intersections of oppressed and marginalised identities. Activists experiencing this firsthand have been telling us for decades that those least responsible for causing the climate crisis are those who are being affected first and worst. It's a bit late, but it has been good to see the wider movement here embracing these conversations. My concern, however, is that it's not engaging with the issue of racism in full. When climate groups start talking about the cause of the crisis, they point to unrelenting capitalism as the problem, which of course it is. But capitalism does not exist without racism. This is the conversation we're still failing to have. Early on in this talk, I want to acknowledge that everything I have learned comes from those who have and are directly experiencing systemic racism and who are on the front lines of the crisis. I also acknowledge my privilege in being able to learn these things rather than experiencing them myself, and my general privilege by virtue of my whiteness, my nationality, and my class. When I came to the climate movement last year, it was after a decade of learning and being involved in activism around America's prison industrial complex, known as the PIC. This refers to the industrial scale and functioning of the prison system, where the interests of the government and corporations are indistinguishable from each other. The PIC also sees the police, surveillance, and imprisonment as the best ways to respond to problems that are inherently economic, social, and political, like mental health, homelessness, and gender violence. Learning about just how extensive this system and way of functioning is, and how it manifests according to systemic racism, has informed, shaped, and inspired my activism and my actions every day. I was drawn to the newer groups emerging in the climate space that I thought were demanding the system change I too so desperately wanted for the world. I find it helpful to think about the system in this way. Our economies, institutional and political practices, personal beliefs and behaviours, policy and culture all interact with each other to maintain a social, political, and economic hierarchy where class, race, gender, sexuality, and other identities define one's position and experience. Members of the dominant group or groups enjoy privileges the oppressed and marginalized groups do not, and these same oppressed groups also experience specific disadvantages that the dominant group does not. The reason there are dominant and oppressed groups is not accidental. Dominant groups need oppressed groups to stay oppressed so they can stay dominant. The prison industrial complex in America is a living, breathing example of this, and can also help us understand how this is replicated throughout society more widely. Slavery was abolished in 1865 and ratified into the American Constitution as the 13th Amendment. About a decade later, the country was deep in an economic crisis, having lost its main and free workforce. Having possibly foreseen this, the white men in power had written a loophole into the 13th Amendment, which stated that slavery was abolished except for criminals, who were considered legal slaves. They capitalized on this by creating new laws to target Black people. For example, being unemployed, the obvious reality for many previous slaves, became illegal. This meant they were arrested, reinstated as slaves, and set to work. This amendment is still in the Constitution today. Incarcerated people in the US are still legal slaves, and companies are still using this loophole to provide free or almost free labor in their production lines. The PIC more generally is a for-profit business. Whilst only 8% of prisons in the US are privately owned, 100% of prisons use private companies to provide all their supplies, food, clothing, handcuffs, even the gym equipment. Prisons need people in them in order to keep that profit going and growing. And whilst this is the case, those in power will continue to exploit Black people and poor people of color, along with the poorest white people in the country, to enable the prison economy. At the very heart of it all sit racism and a drive for profit, and they work in tandem. In fact, what we see is that racism produces profit. So whilst there is money to be made, there will always be racism. Actually, racism came first. And so when we moved into capitalism, racism was seen as the key to its success. America's prison industrial complex is just one example of this in action, but every system and institution works like this in every country at every level. Going into each of these would become a whole separate talk of its own, so I'll leave it there for now, but perhaps we can come back to it in the questions. I'm convinced that the pandemic alone has revealed for many who had yet to truly see them, the fractures, vulnerabilities, and deeply entrenched injustices of a system designed this way. Now, with the current Black Lives Matter uprisings happening in all 50 states in America and across the globe, it's clear that even more people have come to realize this than we could ever have imagined. It seems, though, that there are still some people who have not quite engaged with this. When the pandemic hit, I saw many calls from climate activists for government and the general public not to forget that there is also a climate crisis to contend with. I'm now hearing this again with BLM and the idea that these issues are distinct and separate. I find this quite bewildering. This is the crisis. When I talk about the climate situation as a crisis or an emergency, I'm usually referring to three things. One, the physical devastation caused by the increase in number and strength of extreme weather events like flooding and earthquakes, alongside drought, leading to failed crops and polluted water supplies. Two, the economic and socio-economic consequences of these events, and the bit that is so often left out. Three, both the physical and the socio-economic processes that are causing these things in the first place. What all of these elements have in common is systemic racism and a drive for profit. Oil is a great example. Oil is highly profitable. So when CEOs of oil companies want to make the most profit possible, they'll choose the cheapest way to drill for it. This means they will build pipelines through land that the system considers worthless, and moreover, where those who live on it are considered disposable. This is usually on indigenous land or in poor communities of color. In other words, already oppressed peoples. When this oil is then released into the atmosphere as a fossil fuel, it contributes to the increase in global warming. We know that this exponential increase in global temperatures is disrupting the careful balance of our natural world, leading to more and worse extreme weather events, which again hit the land and people with the least responsibility for causing the problem, with the least resources to respond to these events, and which are least protected in the first place. Then there's the aftermath of the disaster, where homes, businesses, possessions, and infrastructure are destroyed. The economic consequences are often insurmountable. The poorest and most marginalized people in the world are the ones who suffer and struggle the most. The way the coronavirus pandemic is playing out is vastly similar. It's a physical health problem that is directly affecting millions of people around the world. And of those people, we know that the most oppressed are being disproportionately affected. In the UK, people from non-white communities are twice as likely to die from COVID-19. In the USA, Black people are up to 7 times more likely to die than white people. In both countries, the reasons are the same. Long-term systemic racism means that people from these communities are more likely to be working in frontline jobs like bus drivers and health workers. They're also experiencing a virus on top of centuries of housing and healthcare inequality, which has led to them being more physically susceptible to the kinds of underlying health conditions that lead to higher rates of death with coronavirus. They're also more likely to live in more confined conditions that make social distancing difficult or impossible. Essentially, everything is stacked against oppressed communities. The socioeconomic impacts of a lockdown also hit those least equipped to deal with it, those already living in vulnerable circumstances, and those without the resources to survive. This pandemic has not created something new. It simply made systemic racism, inequality, and injustice starker and more obvious than they already were. And honestly, they were already pretty obvious. Though we may now be feeling quite accustomed to the changes that this pandemic has struck down upon us, just take a moment to think back to that first month, the shock and the suddenness of everything, how overwhelming and terrifying things felt. Though those of us who call for dismantling the system are criticized for being dramatic and idealistic, this pandemic has proven us to be quite the opposite. As we watch our economies dip into the deepest recession in a century and think about how that will impact on so many people around the world, I don't think it's merely ideological to call for the end of neoliberal capitalism. However, what we must also recognize and start to integrate into everything we do, particularly in the climate space, is to recognize that we are not living in a system of just capitalism, but a system of racial capitalism. This pandemic has shown us how close we are to collapse and the alarming realities of this world we have created. But it's also shown us that when we have to, even countries under the most extreme version of racial capitalism will take immediate action to stop everything overnight, particularly when it's possible that it will affect those in positions of power. We must not forget that the impossible happened. We must refuse to accept that it can't happen again. Rebecca Solnit wrote a piece at the start of lockdown that articulated the words I was struggling to find myself. To paraphrase, she quotes something Patricia Cullors from Black Lives Matter wrote, which states that the movement exists to provide hope and inspiration for collective action, to build collective power, to achieve collective transformation, rooted in grief and rage, but pointed towards vision and dreams. Rebecca Solnit says that this is beautiful, not only because it is hopeful, but because it acknowledges that hope can coexist with difficulty and suffering. Hope is not optimism that everything will be fine regardless. Hope offers us clarity that, amid the uncertainty ahead, there will be conflicts worth joining and the possibility of winning some of them. And one of the things most dangerous to this hope is the lapse into believing that everything was fine before disaster struck, and that all we need to do is return to things as they were. Ordinary life before the pandemic was already a catastrophe of desperation and exclusion for too many human beings, an environmental and climate catastrophe, an obscenity of inequality. It is too soon to know what will emerge from this emergency, but it's not too soon to start looking for chances to help decide it. I don't know exactly what the future looks like, but I have an idea of what it will take to get there. It will take more activism than we've ever seen before. It will take people who wouldn't even consider themselves activists to join in. It will take us to stop calling ourselves activists because there cannot be a separation. The world is standing at the precipice of total system overhaul. And if we mobilize right, we actually might be able to achieve it. The only way to do this is to recognize that it's not possible to address systemic racism and climate separately. They are the same thing. We have a responsibility to learn what this really means and call for the system that created and perpetuates it to be dismantled. Many of us have a greater responsibility because of our privilege and particularly our skin color. If, like me, you are white, we have a lot of work to do. Remember that there is great power in those who benefit the most from the system, resisting it, rejecting it, and calling for its abolition. This is the moment to be learning and acting. This is the revolution. Thank you.
Many thanks, Molly. That was, really great to hear you give that talk. So for the next sort of 15 minutes, I thought we could have some discussion between the three of us. So feel free to unmute yourselves, Annalise and Molly. Whilst we sort of have this brief discussion, folks, feel free to keep chucking questions into the chats if you're on Zoom or if you're on YouTube Live. Yeah, so I'll just sort of start with this more of a comment really, and then sort of hand over to the pair of you to kind of add your thoughts or wherever your thoughts have been going. But as both of you were speaking, I was thinking a lot sort of back to what Arundhati Roy said earlier on in the pandemic, which was that the pandemic is a portal. She said that at a point in time where I know that I myself was still kind of very much feeling kind of blustered around by the kind of unprecedented nature of everything that was happening around us, and the oversight necessary to be able to see the pandemic as being the portal that it is, I think is a really, really useful framework. And I think I've been hearing a lot of people kind of circling the questions now of like, how do I align my practice with, like you were saying, Annalise, kind of like scaling now towards community rather than towards sort of maximization in a world that is still framing everything around maximization. But I think that the key is that it's an assumption that the world is a maximization framed world, because we don't know what world we're in anymore. It's certainly not the world, you know, even the World Health Organization said, I can't remember if it was yesterday or the day before, that, you know, that there's not, for the foreseeable future, there is going to be no normal, you know. The thing that we used to know as being the world, we're not going to jump straight back into that again. That world, it doesn't exist anymore. So, you know, that is kind of what we're imagining the world to be. But the world is whatever we imagine it to be. And now we have this portal that's kind of shown us what's really kind of, I think the veil has been lifted from a lot of people's eyes because of the pandemic, and then because of uprising, because of everything that the pandemic has caused and all of that trauma that has been made visible by the pandemic. We're no longer in the world that we thought we were in, that was so fixed. So we're in something that's much more shifting now, that is a portal, and we have to decide what it's a portal into. Yeah. I don't know if you two want to add anything on all that.
I really like the term portal, and I also want to speak to the fact that we wouldn't have seen the uprising in the United States start the way that we did, and like from my end, like wouldn't have been a part of that had we not had 2 months of rest. And rest is radical. Rest is revolutionary. In a capitalist world where you are supposed to work to earn your right to eat and have a roof over your head and be clothed and be fed, like I already said eat, but I'm getting mad. To have to grind to survive And then if we even go back to slavery, where like people were working 20 hours in a field, rest was not a thing that you could do. And rest is regenerative. Rest is critical. Rest is important. And I'm going to throw some shade at Elon Musk. He doesn't sleep. And then he does really crazy things on the internet and in life. Like, we need to sleep, and we need to have time for our bodies to integrate experiences. We need to have time for food to digest. We just need to have time to rest. And the fact that we were rested made us ready. So then we saw mobilization happen. I believe this is in the resource document, but there's a talk with Kwame Ture from, I forget what year it is. It's about converting the unconscious to conscious. And he talks a lot about the difference between mobilizing and organizing, and being a mobilizer and being an organizer. So what I think happened is we got mobilized, and this portal mobilized us. But now we have to organize. So we have to take this momentum and we have to funnel it correctly. And like, the revolution will not be a hashtag. The revolution will not, social media is a tool for us to communicate. It is a way for us to disseminate information, but the work will be on the ground. The work will be offline. We have to, right now, look to our ancestors. We have to look to the revolutionaries who laid bricks already, and we have some still living with us. Angela Davis is here, like, speaking every week. It seems there's an interview with Angela Davis, and there's a plethora on YouTube of interviews and recordings from Malcolm X, from Kwame Ture, from like the Panthers. I'm looking a lot at the Panthers right now because I think they were ahead of their time. And they reflect on the things that went wrong, that they did, that didn't go right. And there's a point at when they were assassinated or when they were taken down with the FBI that we can carry on from. And I think that after the civil rights movement and after the Black Panthers fell in 72, I believe it was the early 70s, I think we saw a plateau of progress. And I think if you look at up until that point, from the end of slavery to that point, we saw dramatic progress for Black people in America. Then you look after that, and we've become docile almost. We've become pacified by neoliberal democratic politics. So in suburbia, yeah, it looks great. And in suburbia, like, I had the opportunity to go to rallies in the town I grew up in, the small, predominantly white, middle to upper middle class town, and then being in Boston. It's a picnic in the small town. People don't understand police brutality because police over-police areas and create violence. So then in Boston, you had the Boston PD laying bricks for the protest, like to instigate things with protesters, and they were showing up with jail buses and tanks. So it's like, just to see that so clearly, that suburban America has become like the face of America and freedom. So then underneath that, what's happening with the prison industrial complex, the school to prison pipeline, it can be overlooked, and people can think that we've made all this change that we haven't. But then I think the pandemic, as this portal of, the veil's been, like you said, the veil's been lifted. Like, there is no hiding anymore. We can't, and the administrations are being shown for what they truly are. And we can't hide that. Like Betsy DeVos literally sacrificing 15,000 children to send them back to school. And we can look at the links of Betsy DeVos. Her brother is affiliated with Blackwater, which was the private military force that even the Bush administration was like, absolutely not, because they're so heinous in other countries. Prison industrial complex is also the American military. What the police do in America, the military does on foreign soil. So I think that, yes, the pandemic it's just showing us all this thing that people on the far left have been aware of, but now, no, we can't hide it anymore. Like, it's just there and it's in front of us. We've been mobilized, and where we're at right now is a call to get organized. And this space is really important because it's like, how do we bring together the different movements? It's not, I consolidate them, it's unite them. And it's like, unite them in their individual power so that we can support people. Kwame Ture, in this talk, I'm going to wrap up soon because I'm ranting now, but in the talk, Kwame Ture talks about how Malcolm X was assassinated when he was in between organizations. So after he left the Nation of Islam, when RAM and SNCC were kind of fighting over him, that was when he got assassinated because he didn't have the organizational backing. But then when Martin Luther King was assassinated, there was a mobilized response after because he had organizational affiliation. So it's it's organizing change, it's organizing our steps forward, it's keeping ourselves safe, it's protecting ourselves. Because when you have, like, the FBI in America takes down people trying to restructure the systems. We can't do that in silos and stay safe. Like, uniting us is safety, and it's critical. It's super important. That's that.
Yeah, I think, like, a lot of the time, for folks, we've been talking a lot about this recently, but for folks in the UK, there feels, those of us who are feeling the need for uprising now, and who are needing to respond to that. There's so much focus on what's happening in America, and I think there is some struggle that I've been noticing in, like, people here trying to figure out, okay, so, like, well, how do I apply that here with everything that's going on around me, and, like, with what we're doing here. And there was something that I wrote before the talk that I'll just read out, but that for me kind of summarizes where the power actually is. So the battleground for social movement is social situations as much as it is out on the streets, and, you know, the ballot boxes. Yes, we can vote and march to make our voices known to the powers of governance and to unite our voices, but this move towards abolition, which we're seeing worldwide, is interesting to those of us who have been abolitionists for some time, because it speaks of a moment of massive reckoning with the fact that the systems which oppress will not be the ones to save the oppressed. That realization itself is a move towards liberation, because it means the realization of our power, the power to build community, the power of nurtured, supported, and bonded community. This movement is people en masse starting to imagine boldly and build. It's community that is where the power is. And when we start refocusing, and that's where, you know, as artists, so many of us within this chat, within this Zoom meeting are artists, and we work with community, we work with people on the ground. That's where the power is, and that's where the work needs to be happening. Yeah, I just wanted to add in that. But yeah. Molly, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so everything that Annalise you just said, Hannah, I'm just like nodding away. The thing about rest is so huge for activists, and I think people that would call themselves activists or consider themselves that way, often you'll find that also quite driven, and, you know, literally it's in the word active. They want to be out and doing things and keeping busy, and burnout, you know, is a huge problem is a capitalist problem, but it's particularly, I think, also in activism, we forget that it happens. Even if you start rejecting elements of capitalism, you're still going to burn out. Still a capitalist world, we're still living in this system. But another point that I thought was that you're bringing up about sort of this moment of reckoning is really interesting. I've heard some people that I know recently sort of talk about, oh God, you know, thank God we're living, not maybe pre-COVID, but like, thank God we're living in 2020 and not, you know, at least, you know, I'm a gay man and I don't have to hide my identity, or I'm you know, I'm a Black person and I actually managed to get a job, you know, and people say these things, and I'm, you know, I don't want to take that away from anyone. But what I guess what it brings for me is this idea of like settling, that we sort of settle for simple reforms that are actually essentially given to us by the systems. The system like will permit sort of from here to here. And then when it gets to this point, which is basically where I think we are now, this is where it starts to get scared, where its power is being threatened, its ability to maintain control is potentially undermined. And from here onwards is the real work. And I think that some people may well feel very, you know, relieved that you don't have to hide from your, you know, your sexuality. And in many ways, of course, that's brilliant. And it's a different world we're living in than the, you know, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. But at some point we have to say, like, this is not enough. Like, liberation is so much more than this. And we have to take this moment for that, I think. I don't know that I've ever felt like a moment like this has come about before in sort of the last couple of decades. I feel like it could possibly happen again. I think we are now just going to be spiraling through moments like this, but why wait? So I think the idea of like this being a portal to imagining bigger, better in terms of liberating ourselves and liberating others, I think is huge right now.
Can I respond to that? I have, so that question about, so it makes me think of the truth kind of discourse I was having, where like, how do we hold both? So in my personal healing journey, celebration and joy are also radical and really important. But it's like not to pacify and like in too far, I would say when we're like still steeped in a lack mentality or still steeped in scarcity, which capitalism requires, like even billionaires are even maybe more deeply scared, have a more deep scarcity mentality than middle class or lower class working class people, because they're hoarding. Like that's not a behavior you exhibit if you know abundance and if you trust that your needs will be met. So if we look at that as like an extreme scarcity, and even I would say it's scarcity to be like, well, at least I have this. So then that comes to self-worth. And again, it's like back to valuing. It's like, it's not, okay, cool, I have a job. That's it. That's all I deserve in this life. It's dreaming up futures for the collective. Starts with dreaming up our own futures. Is like, how do I want to live? What do I want my days to look like? Like personally, I'll know I'm successful when I can like eat fruit and take naps in the sun as much as I want to, because like my needs are met. And like, that's something that I want us to normalize, is like, we deserve to feel good. Like that's something that we can strive for. Like we don't have to strive for the confines of capitalism. And like, I think it's all unlearning and it's like ongoing, which is why I say like, I think healing is the root of the revolution, because it's like the more you heal and the more you connect with your truth, the more you automatically know you deserve. Because you can't, once you know, I don't know if people are familiar with like the 5% Nation, which broke off from the Nation of Islam, and they have a school in Harlem, but they basically teach Black people that they are earth and that they are God. Humans are earth and humans are God. We come of this earth, and like that's magnificent. And to like look to the earth for support, to look to the earth for healing, to understand we will heal reciprocally with the earth, I feel is like another way to like manage that breakdown between like climate justice and racial justice. Like you're saying, climate justice groups being like, but what about the climate, when people are talking about racial justice? And it's like, not separate, literally not separate. But it's, again, capitalism also teaches separateness and it teaches individualism. So like healing is like coming home to yourself. Healing is coming home to the planet. Healing is coming home to the humanity and the collective, and it's becoming one. So I think it's a self-worth question to be like, do you deserve to have a job? Do you deserve for your identity to be accepted or tolerated? Like we talk about like tolerance politics with Martin Luther King. Like, I don't care if you will tolerate me. Like that's, and same with like, you'll never hear me say Black Lives Matter. I don't have to convince you of my humanity. That's not something that I will do, because like I am human. And I think that that's something we need to like teach ourselves and like teach the youth and like teach kids that like, you deserve to feel good. You deserve to be healthy. You deserve to be cared for. You deserve to be loved. And like, that's how we start to like undo living in a really violent, traumatic, sick society that breaks us and like makes us feel like we just deserve the bare minimum.
And I think like on that point of how I think now I'm certainly noticing a lot of openness towards spiritual frameworks which wasn't so open a couple of years ago, and I think it is the beginning of a certain kind of decolonial movement that we need, which moves away from this idea that the only framework which is good and pure and true is the framework that was created within a colonial structure that is science. There are these other frameworks that work real well, and that in itself, that kind of like putting that one framework on a pedestal, and anything that is not that framework is, you know, whatever spirituality is like wishy-washy, is something else. That in itself is so clearly racism, and we need to have a reckoning with that in order to be able to reap the benefits of healing. Because if we're not able to connect with ourselves and to understand the wholeness of ourselves, whether I am someone who is oppressed or framing in a certain situation as someone who is oppressed or as an oppressor, there is healing that needs to happen on both of those sides. Because no person, if they are carrying out the role of the oppressor, no person should feel that they're personal, that they're only whole if someone else is below them. That's not wholeness. So on either end, like everyone needs to deepen reaching wholeness and find tools and be able to share tools with one another to actually build community, to help one another reach wholeness, to understand what then needs to be done. But yeah. Molly, did you have anything else to add in the discussion?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, great. We're running on time so far, which is amazing. Daniela, do you have a question from the Zoom to pick out?
Yeah, there are quite a few popping up now, actually. So there's quite a few asking about, there's a lot of talk about intersectionality, which is sort of quite interesting. The first one, I don't know how much time we have. The first time was from Ruth. I don't know if Ruth would like to shed the question live here. Ruth, you can just unmute yourself.
We have about 20 minutes for the question section.
Hi, thank you.
Hello, hi Ruth.
Yeah, so my question was, I mean, primarily for Molly, but also anyone else who wants to jump in. But it was really based on sort of speaking to your point about intersectionality in the climate justice movement. And obviously one of the key issues particularly, I guess, in this country, but maybe across the sort of world, is how white the movement is. And I've been thinking a lot about it because at the moment I'm following the Culture Declares Emergency movement as it's trying to develop its vision and strategy. And I've been thinking a lot about how the movement really needs to make intersectionality absolutely central to their mission. And right now it's primarily sort of white middle class people who are determining the direction of the movement, and that concerns me. Now I've got sort of my own views about how this could be changed, but I'd love to hear what you think, sort of what might be ways in which the UK climate movement can essentially be less white to give away some of its power. Otherwise, I'm really concerned and quite skeptical of how it can engage and fulfill its mission.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I obviously share your concerns. It's a really big question, so I'm just trying to think of how to sort of break it down. So I'll try and go through a few different points and try to be not super long. So the first thing I'll say is that I think there's certainly an issue around movements being white middle class. I think that sometimes when that is thrown around, there's a bit of nuance that's missed. I suppose I can just say, I was part of Extinction Rebellion for a while, and I left the movement because of its unwillingness and inability to engage with systemic racism. Essentially everything that I spoke about Extinction Rebellion can't seem to quite do. But when I was in Extinction Rebellion with a group of people who were predominantly not white, we created a group to try and get people to do what Instagram is doing at the moment, which is telling people to go and learn about systemic racism. And it's been amazing to see people engaging with it now, particularly white people, particularly people that I had not expected in my own circles to start posting and sharing and reading and asking questions. So what I find sometimes with the sort of blanket statement that the environmental movement is predominantly white middle class is there's an element of erasure. So I worked with people of color, Black people within the movement. So when those statements were made, I was like, well, what about my friends? Who are they? You know, do they just not count? So there's actually something that can perpetuate some of that problem a little bit. But on the whole, yes, the truth is there are lots of white middle class people. Again, for me, the nuance there is that is inherently problematic because they're sort of taking on, I should say, we are taking on opinions and experience that are not our own. So what we're essentially doing is regurgitating it, but we don't always acknowledge that's what we're doing. It's why I tried to do that myself, because I acknowledge that nothing that I've learned is my own. I've learned it from other people that are experiencing it firsthand. And I see my role specifically as speaking to other white people, because I'm not here to tell non-white people about their own experiences, but I'm here to try and share the information that I've gathered from people that are experiencing things firsthand to people that are not. And again, I think that some of the climate movement fails to do that. How do we change that? Well, the other thing to acknowledge is that actually the climate movement, whatever we use that to mean, is predominantly led by frontline communities, people, so particularly Indigenous communities, particularly people from low income communities, Black people, people of color, predominantly women, the global South. And actually what we're doing here is we are just replicating that. So I think that acknowledging that, first of all, would be a really helpful step that doesn't seem to happen most of the time. I think there's a lot that needs to happen in terms of stepping back. I realize that I'm speaking quite a lot, but I try to do that a bit less, particularly in climate space. I think that it's about, you know, if you have a platform, it's giving it over. There was actually, I mean, we won't go into the whole celebrity culture thing, but what I found quite interesting with the pandemic was there was a bit of a push where some celebrities were giving over their social media accounts entirely to doctors, predominantly non-white doctors, actually. I thought it was a really interesting, it's like quite a simplified version of what we mean by giving over your platform. It's not you have, you know, millions of followers and you're making a video with you in it talking about an issue. It's you have millions of followers and you're putting someone else on that platform. That's very simplified and sort of social media, but I think that can be replicated in the movement more widely. But I do think that this acknowledgement as well, again, what I spoke about of race as a problem on both the back and the front end of the climate crisis is the only thing that I think can like shift the way the climate movement works in this part of the world or this country anyway, which is, I don't know so much about the climate movement worldwide, but particularly here. I think that until the wider environmental movement starts to acknowledge that racism is the climate crisis and that these are not separate issues, I hope it can still be successful, but I very highly doubt it at all. I'll stop, and if anyone else wants to jump in, please do.
Yeah, I would just add to what Molly was saying. So I was a part of that group that Molly was referencing within Extinction Rebellion, also left Extinction Rebellion for the very same reasons. So I think broadly speaking, within sort of what we're talking about when we're talking about the climate movement, as it is coming from the UK, from America, we're seeing a lot of this narrative that's like, why should people care about the climate? Well, because in a couple of generations' time, your children are going to be potentially affected and dying and in situations that are unlivable because of this. That is racist, because already people are in situations in other places around the world where their children are dying, where they are dying, where they're being pushed out of their homes, out of their lands. All of these things are already happening. And the response that I often get from climate activists to that reframing of that narrative is that, yes, but this is the narrative that works, and this is the narrative that mobilizes white people. We're not gonna get climate justice unless we dismantle capitalism. We're not gonna dismantle capitalism unless we dismantle racism. So if you wanna use that narrative, that's just because you want to use a racist narrative. That's all it boils down to. So we need to change that narrative. We need to be using a narrative that is the real narrative, that it's more of an emergency because people are already dying and are already in those situations. And if we can pull it from there, if we're actually not just as a matter of, you know, what's our campaign and, you know, what's the best thing that we can say on social media to make us look really great. But if we can actually be moving from that point of necessity, then naturally all of the other things will fall into place. Like different people and different voices will be centered and uplifted. People will move out of the way so that their platforms can be used for other people. So I think it's about really, really interrogating not how can we change who's involved in this same structure, but like it's driving towards the wrong thing. It needs to actually realize that the struggle against racism and liberation on that front is the climate struggle. But yeah, did anyone else have anything to add on that specific question? Otherwise we'll move on to the next question. Okay. Cool. Claire, do you have a question from YouTube for us?
Yes, I have several really, really interesting questions. So I'm just going to scroll back up. So there was a question from Udit Thackeray, who uses he, him, and they, them pronouns, who had a question for Molly. Several questions, actually. So I'm just going to try and roll them into one big question, if that's okay, Udit. So, question for Molly is, why choose to study the USA's prison industrial complex as a white English person? Have you considered its power in reproducing the tyranny and primacy of a white English opinion on how the world works? And so related to this, in the same vein, have you considered studying the UK prison industrial complex? If not, why not consider something closer to home to address and opine on?
Okay, yeah, big question, and one I do get quite often. I'm going to use that really cringe phrase, which is, I didn't choose to study the American prison system, it chose me. Not really, but it just sort of, it just happened. I didn't sort of go out of my way to investigate it. But so essentially I sort of learned about the extent of it when I was about 16. So I had a very different brain. I hadn't looked into these things or studied these things. And obviously as time's gone on, I have been thinking more and more about the UK system. I have actually been involved in some work here. So I was actually mentoring someone as they were leaving prison for a short while, which was an extremely challenging situation, given that there is no support in this country. And so I learned a lot in actually quite a short space of time. But I suppose a very simple answer for me, and this is just a personal one, it's not a great answer. The American system to me just is sort of an extreme version of everything. And I see it as like a sort of a microcosm and a lens through which to understand the world. And that's really, I talk about prisons so much, and it's because it is it's like the system that I see replicated everywhere. that's not to say I shouldn't do more work on the system here. I am starting to do that, and as Hannah's mentioned, that sort of looking at how things are in the US and how things are here. The abolition movement in the UK is nothing like the movement in the US, but it's something that we are actually quite actively taking steps to try and move into a bit more. So hopefully I can do a bit better work on that side of things. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Molly. That was well done. That was a super tricky question to answer. You did a really good job. Yeah, and thank you to both question askers we've had so far. We have a little more time for questions. Daniela, do you have another question for us?
There was, let me see if she's still here. Is Leah? Leah had a question for Annelies. I don't know if she's
I'm
here. Hi. I don't know if you want to share it yourself. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a great conversation. Yeah, Annelies, I was just interested to know if you could talk a bit more about your use of tarot as a healing method, and whether it's something that you use really to kind of tap into your own thoughts and feelings, or if it's something that you also kind of do with other people, and whether you have anything to say about how these methods might help to kind of change or reframe relationships.
Yeah, so tarot for me started out as like literally a tool to get through a really difficult time. I came across a trauma-informed approach and some trauma-informed teachers, and I was using it to heal myself. Truthfully, I did nothing else for like 2 months. I was like straight up 40 hours a week, like on tarot, because it was the only relief I found. So it started like that, but then the way I regenerated myself super quickly and like got myself out of like a really difficult place through it made me really want to share it with other people. So I did start reading for other people, and then now I do a monthly subscription on Patreon. So and I have some people that I work with one-to-one, which I'm open to, but I really like working with people on an ongoing basis. And I call it like spirit support. And I also bring in energetics just so that I can hold space. And then this is to say that for me, healing is co-created. I don't think healing happens in a vacuum, and I don't think healing can happen individually. As I mentioned, my community was vital. Like so many points where my community has propped me up and kept me from falling through the cracks. In that, it's like the Socratic method in teaching, right? So like the teacher and the student both learn and benefit from the interaction if done correctly. And that's how I feel about holding space for people. So I refer to myself as like a healing artist, because I don't fully feel comfortable with the term healer, because I think we're all self-healers. Our bodies literally, we cut ourselves, our body heals itself. We break a bone, our body heals itself. So we all have that capacity for healing. I consider myself as someone who holds space for that. And then through that perspective, I'm able to gain so much from my one-to-one readings with people, from reading with my friends. Actually, one of my friends who was with me for the beginning of my tarot journey and was alongside me learning tarot is in this call, Eve. Yeah, so I learn a great deal from working with other readers. But yeah, so in terms, it's the question you brought up about like my own thoughts and feelings is interesting, because I think it relates to Hannah's point about decolonizing healing. So it's, how do we explain mysticism? How do we explain intuition? How do we, that doesn't fit into the frameworks of society that we're in. But a lot of it is space for me to tap into the wisdom that I have in me, is the best way that I can explain that. And then when I dialogue about it with my friends or with people I'm reading, so the way I read also, I'm not an oracle. I don't predict your future. It's very, very rooted in the present moment. And it's a dialogue. So if I read for someone, I'm asking them questions. We're talking about things, like we're building out the story together. So that all of that plays into the power of tarot, and then what I'm able to take away from it. And I think there's a question about the trauma of POC that I would really like to address. And I think it kind of relates to this. So I don't know if like that's cool to just kind of like dive into that. Okay, I saw it in the Zoom chat. So Claire, I don't know if this is your question or if you just mediated it, but type,
Yes, mine.
How can we account for the trauma of POC having to enact change within historically institutionally racist institutions they work with within like museums? In your opinion, is that rehabilitation even possible given its roots in racism and colonial violence? So this, no, I do not think, like based on the museum industrial complex in the United States, I can't speak, I lived in the UK for a while, but I can't speak to like the funding of the museums, but I know the museums are filled with stolen artifacts. So like already probably not. But in the States, like I had brought up Blackwater, I brought up Betsy DeVos, like Energy Transfer Partners who approved the Dakota Access Pipeline. Like, that's all money that goes into the museums in New York City. And we call it the Museum Industrial Complex because it is blood money. Like that actually funds these museums, and it's artifacts that are stolen from all over the world. To me, the reparative healing that comes from that is not inside those institutions, because I'm going to say something controversial. Representation doesn't matter. Like werepresentation is something that I think me and Molly have both touched on this. They put a brown man in the presidency and then Black people are satisfied. We're that's supposed to be enough. And it's saying that the presidency is this something to strive for. It's something that has to exist. It's something that is the epitome of success. So by putting Black figureheads in these positions of hierarchy within the already standing system is just keeping us quiet. And it's just keeping us, I think Molly used like a scale kind of being like, you're allowed to have this much liberation, but as soon as you get here, like we're going to stop you. And I think it's a big representation can be this really big distraction, because it's back to what I was saying. It's not the truth. It's not the root of the problem. And I think the trauma healing that has to happen is not going to happen in those spaces. Like healing in those spaces it will probably trigger us. And decolonial healing is something I've been looking a lot into to hold space for with common healing. So I want to hold a decolonial white healing space, because I do not believe that truly healing spaces, I don't think you can have like Black people and white people in a healing space right now at this point. And I think that is maybe a controversial opinion. I tend to have a bit of a separatist stance for some of like the early action. Or if it's done, the space has to be held so well and so skillfully, because white people healing their trauma could likely trigger Black people healing their trauma. And we see it every day. Black people healing their trauma triggers white people a lot. We see a lot of like white tears, white guilt, like, and then that then puts a burden and further traumatizes Black people. So it's not to say like we can't coexist. That's not what it's to say. It's to recognize nuance and to see that it's a different journey. So healing, if your ancestors colonized, if your ancestors owned slaves, that's a different healing journey than if your ancestors were enslaved. So it's just different. And I've been trying to like navigate that as a space holder. Like, what is my role? What feels like a burden to me? And educating people on how to be an ally feels like a burden. That's something that doesn't feel good for me. But talking to white allies and having prison abolition conversations when they're already on a certain level of thought is nourishing to me. The most nourishing thing to me is celebrating joy and success with Black, queer, like artists, femme artists. That's for me, because that's my experience. So I think a lot about the transition period. The goal is we've completely thrown out race and gender. Like we don't have to live within those confines anymore. And we're free from that. We can't just throw it out though, without recognizing the harm, without healing the harm of those boxes and social constructs being put onto us. And we have to do that in really intentional, safe spaces. And maybe there could be this like even I'm half white and I'm half Black. So I'm like thinking a lot about how do I integrate my white lineage into the Black healing I've been doing? And like, how do I hold both of that within my body? So I think it's just understanding our truth. It's knowing that there's possibilities for us to create places to display our art that are not using money that's killing people. There's ideas of, there's like visions of success for us that exist outside of capitalism. Like maybe it's something that we haven't seen before, but healing spaces also to me can be dream spaces. It's spaces to create future visions. So in short, no, I don't think those institutions can be healed. I think it's about us and healing ourselves as individuals, healing our communities, healing collectives, and then building anew from the ground up.
Thank you, Annalise. To speak just really briefly to the situation in the UK, it is exactly the same in terms of the guilt and the fact that the process is going to be is a long process, and if it's going to be done right, it's not about representation in a situation where we're talking about museums and heritage and archives which are structurally racist and which are displaying objects which are stolen. Just representation plastered onto that is irresponsible, and it's also sacrificial. Like, those people that are then in those positions are like a lamb to the slaughter. So we actually have to like do the really difficult work first before you get to the point of going, oh, everyone's okay now, so we can just, you need to do the work of addressing the reason why there aren't already Black people in those positions, not just putting Black people in those positions, and then also do the work of everything that the museum industry wants to avoid, which is actually giving back stolen things, which is what they don't want to do. So yeah, I absolutely agree with Annalise when it comes to the UK museum system as well.
That's rehabilitative. That to like, for them to give back the artifacts, that exchange is healing. And like that would be the work that needs to happen. And like we saw I think someone mentioned the podcast too, like this podcast being taken down, these museums deplatforming, giving everything back and closing their doors. Like that is rehabilitative and healing, because they've now created a space for other people to grow from where they've oppressed them. And I think Molly was talking about, or Hannah, I can't remember, but talking about like that deplatforming and that being a mechanism of white healing, where like receiving is a mechanism of like Black, Indigenous, people of color healing and stepping into power. So it's like literally the direct opposite, which is like kind of to further my point about nuanced healing spaces.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, thank you. I think we're going to have to wrap up on the questions there just because of time, but thank you everyone who asked questions, and we can continue conversations over other platforms. And if anyone is interested specifically in abolition, definitely get in touch. You can probably do that via, if you head to the this event page on the Social Art Network, there are each of our websites linked, and then on our websites are our contact details. So yeah, if you'd like to get in touch with any of the three of us, please head there and do so. But thank you everyone for being a part of this event, and thank you for engaging. Thank you for speaking, Molly and Annalise. It's been really great to be here with you in this space and to have you share with us. Thank you to the whole Social Art Network team. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, John. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Marcelo. That's it. And I'll just hand over to Claire real quick for next month's Social Art Network Social London Meet. If you could give a little intro to what that will be.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for this amazing meetup and answering my questions and just really incredible. So I can't believe it's already the end, really. It's just gone by so fast. So next meetup I'm hosting is called Queering Spaces Digital Pride. and we're going to be turning the meetup into a kind of virtual queer bar chat, where we can come and engage with the idea of when we're so used to reclaiming public space, like physical public space, in the light of lockdown, with lots of queer spaces being shut down, with Pride being cancelled, what does queering digital space look like? How do we build and maintain a digital queer community at a time where we're at this risk of alienation from each other? So we'll be engaging with different forms of research and social art practice around that, and maybe addressing the constraints that lockdown has enacted on this, for example, in terms of performance and art activism via direct action, which I think is an inherent part of queer art and culture. So join us then. It'll be fun, I think.
Thank you, Kurt. And the date for that meetup and how people can find out about it?
Yeah, that's a pretty crucial one, isn't it? It's going to happen on Wednesday, 19th of August at 6 p.m. You've got the link in the Zoom chat, and it's on socialartnetwork.org when you click on the meetups for London. So if you sign up there, you'll then have access to the Zoom link. So looking forward to seeing it there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kurt. I'm definitely really looking forward to that one next month. And I will just, before we close the YouTube live, I'll just close with a little quote from Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was born April 9th, 1898, was a concert artist, a bass baritone, an activist, sort of a global activist, amongst many other things. And Paul Robeson had this to say. He said, "Every artist, every scientist must decide now where he stands. He has no alternative. There is no standing above the conflict on Olympian heights. Since the artist must take sides, they must elect to fight for freedom or slavery. I have made my choice. I had no alternative." I just felt like that was a nice, really defining quote to end on. But yeah, thank you again. Hopefully see many of you very soon. John, if you're ready, we can close the YouTube live.